Timer. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. The sun is still shining up here in North Yorkshire, and I'm joined by the lovely Wendy here. So Wendy and I've guested on her podcast, which was an honour and a privilege. And she's one of those really big-hearted people. And so when I thought about doing these back to school with confidence lives, I thought Wendy's the first lady that I need to have on to explain her take, because what we're trying to do is give you a different take. Different people will appeal to different people will appeal to different people, don't they? You know, and different approaches to, you know, confidence, happiness, back to school, COVID, not that hand wringing, oh, what are we going to do? But no, what are we going to do? You know, so I'm a little bit hyper because I've been in my head. I was explaining to Wendy, I've been in my head for the last 2 hours, in the car to the swimming pool, in the car, in my head whilst I'm swimming, and I'm now back into the swing of life, and it's far more enjoyable than being in the head. So, Wendy, would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely viewers, and we'll get straight in.
Thank you, Simon, for your lovely comments. I think sometimes we have very different views about things, and we'll question each other, and I think that's healthy, because I think it is, you know, listening to each other and hearing different viewpoints. And I do have sometimes very differing views to you, Simon, but yeah, I think we can't all be the same about things. Yes, your podcast is still in the queue. I loved the interview. It's still waiting to be produced. So it will come out, and I will let you know when it's coming out, and then you can let all your tribe know as well, your followers.
Cool.
About me, I'm a qualified psychotherapist, and I work with I have 15 years experience.
Wow.
And a lifetime of my own personal experiences, which I've hit a few bumps in the road along the way, but I find that really helps me, because it helps the people I work with, because I never say I understand, because that is arrogant, but it does give me some sense of, I'm not I don't have the perfect life I have, and I've hit those bumps, and it makes me realize that we all struggle at some point in our lives, and I think that's important.
Yeah. Totally agree.
I work with a lot of people who've going through anger, stress, depression, anxiety, relationship issues, traumas in their lives. And so I really, one of my titles, I guess, is the relationship and trauma specialist. I don't call myself an expert, because I don't know what an expert is, but I do specialize in that area. And we all have relationships. We have the relationship with ourselves to start with, but we have relationships with everybody else in our lives, whether it's fleeting or whether it's long-term, whether it's personal or professional. And so, you know, we need those connections. That's important. And as humans, we're tribal, and we're social animals. So I think it's important to notice that's how we connect.
Yeah. I mean, the whole I've struggled thing, and is, for me, is the foundation to empathy. One of the most important mentors in my life couldn't relate to Tony Robbins at all until she saw him have a complete meltdown backstage. You know, we don't want professional, do we? We want real. We want real. And I think part of the challenge in these days is that we're presented with fake reality on social media and on the news channels and in all the adverts, and the voice in our heads compares our insides, which are in turmoil sometimes, with other people's outsides, which seem to be perfect. And we just think, wouldn't that be nice? Well, no, I don't think, the one that pops into my head is Philip Green and his £1 billion, and the fact that he must have all that. He seems to have that lifestyle, but I don't think he's particularly happy at the moment, and don't think he's connecting with his tribe anymore. People aren't shopping at his shops. People aren't wanting to work for him because anyway, so we are presented with this perfection, and
very damaging. Very
sorry?
damaging. It's very damaging. Very
Yeah.
damaging. I think that is the problem, that as you said, we see it everywhere on social media. We see it in adverts. The perfect mother, child runs in covered in mud, and the mother goes, "Oh dear." Well, that's not reality. If your child comes in covered in mud, you're screaming at them probably in one way or another. For God's sake, what have you done? So no, that's not reality at all.
Not reality. Not
it's
reality.
something we have to. Yeah, that fake stuff is so damaging. Absolutely.
Mm. So over the next 20 minutes, I'd love you to share what pointers, what insights. We live in a world obsessed with 10 tips too, and I think this isn't really what changes. It isn't what moves the needle. It fills newspaper columns, and it fills websites so that website people can have some space to sell their adverts on, and the newspaper people. But the 10 tips don't really work, or else we'd all have. I wouldn't have my little muffin tops above my jeans. We wouldn't. We'd all sleep 8 hours, perfect sleep every night, wouldn't we? None of us would ever drink too much. None of us would ever be overweight. We'd all be absolutely perfect if all the tips worked. So I'm conscious. I don't want to talk tips, but everybody says, "Oh, give me the practical stuff." And I think I just want you to share whatever you think will help a dad or a mum who's worried about their kid going back to school, or whose child is worried about going back to school, and keep it as broad as I can do. And that I don't want to try and.
Okay, I can go with that. That's fine. So I'm going to start by saying we those 10 tips, they can be a guideline, but we're not robots, we're not machines, we're humans. And so those 10 tips aren't going to be the solution for everybody. So I just wanted to say that one, because I think too often we get the 10 tips. I just don't like that. We're all different, and we're all going to suffer different things. But what I want to start with is by saying what we're all going through during these last few months, and continue to do. And it is that we're going through the same as you do when you go through the grief process. So first of all, we have the disbelief. No, we're going to wake up tomorrow, it's all gone. And then there are those that actually still disbelieving, because they're saying, "Oh, it's a conspiracy, it's not real," because they don't want to believe it. The next is the anger. How dare it happen? Whose fault is it? That the government aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. What can they make their minds up and give us the real truth of what is really happening and what we should be doing? And then there's the depression of the feeling of all that loss, that sadness of our lives have changed. I can't do this. I can't see my family. I can't have that connection. I can't have all the things that go with it. And sometimes it is loss of jobs and loss of people. People have lost family members, and they haven't been able to actually say goodbye to them, which is really tragic. And I mean, there are very many. You can come to terms with it. Some people, they say there are 5, and some people, they say there are 7. But I would say they're kind of more or less the general ones. But it's not linear. The point is that I've seen people who 6 months on, you would think, "Oh, well, they've come to terms with it." But no, they haven't, because I'm seeing complete breakdowns in people. They are suddenly just falling apart, and they don't understand why. And I want to reassure everybody But this is normal. It's normal given the circumstances that we're going to have all those feelings. And there are some people that distract themselves, and they're distracting themselves. We all do, I guess, in a way. You're distracting yourself with going swimming or doing you're working on your business and so on. I distract myself in lots of different ways as well. But some people are actually distracting themselves by using the virus. They're getting so engrossed in it, reading every single piece of information, that they are using the virus to distract themselves from the virus, which I want to point that out to people, because that's not very healthy. So that's my kind of a little preamble here, Simon. I just wanted to say, because I don't think people ever necessarily recognize this. And kids will go through it, adults go through it, parents will go through it. We'll all go through it. Even though I know this, I still go through it. So for kids going back to school, it's I think there's a lot of anxiety around, and a lot of people aren't quite sure. Different schools have got different rules. In areas where there's high incidence of COVID, then I think the rules are stricter. And when you wear a mask, when you don't wear a mask, etc. That kind of thing. The social distancing seems to be changing, and we don't like uncertainty as human beings either. So that's frightening. We don't like change. So again, those things play into all of this. I just wanted to bring that one out too, because that is something that you can't get out your comfort zone. It's like, oh, this doesn't feel right. And so we will get those senses for anxiety. So I think I was thinking long and hard about this, because we talked, you invited me on here about a week ago, and I started thinking about, how can I be more helpful? What could I offer? So we will feel those senses of anxiety because we're born with it. We have a fear of heights and a fear of loud noises. And we have that part of our brain that we share with every other mammal on this planet, that is a survival system. It doesn't think, it doesn't reason, it reacts. And so when we come out of our comfort zone, whether it's a small thing or whether it's much bigger, our bodies will react, and you'll get your heart beats faster, you start feeling discomfort, maybe you get jelly legs, you get your hands get really sweaty, you feel sick, your head will go completely blank because you can't think of anything, or all those things will go round and round in your head. Now, yeah. And I think when we have that going through in our head, see, people say, oh, you shouldn't ignore that part of the brain that is giving you the negative messages. Oh, this is too scary, this is worrying. Oh no, I shouldn't do that. But the point is that if you ignore that, well, for a start, you'd walk into the traffic in the middle of the road, because that's what it's there for, to stop us from killing ourselves. Or walking off the edge of a cliff or something like that, or a dangerous sport even. But if we ignore that voice, we're doing it a disservice, because it's got something to tell us. But what we need to do more readily is reason with it. Okay, so you think it's really scary to go back to school. Right, so let's examine it. Instead of just dismissing it, say, oh, that's silly, let's think positive. What is that voice telling us? Why are we feeling scared? What are we worried about? And then how can we befriend that part of the brain and use it in a positive way? Because then we can say, well, what have I got to be fearful of? Sometimes it's fear of the unknown. Like we said, you don't like the fear of uncertainty, but it might be something that you can do to protect yourself, to make you feel safer.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about something that's been on my mind a lot recently? Has been kind of separating what we do and what we feel. So my dad once told me about this. He thought that worrying. He was talking about it in a business context, not in a a health context or physical health context. He felt that worrying kept him on his toes, business wise, and I thought, well, and I said, yeah, well, it did to an extent, but did it stop you enjoying the business? And a little tear came to his eye, and it was one of the most touching moments. My dad died like 3 years ago, but we didn't have conversations like this. We didn't have conversations like this. But a little tear came to his eye. So it is about the worry, and I could see where some of my worry came from, because I was obviously just modeling him. But I think there's this belief that we have to be worried to take action. The government particularly, is trying to. They're trying to scare us sometimes. They're trying to scare us into taking action, because they know that it takes a little bit to change our behaviour. But for me, we can, the key is separating. Nobody is saying, I am not saying anyway, don't take the precautions that you need to take, COVID wise. So I've just been to the petrol station. I put my mask on before I went in, But you don't need to be. If we could separate in our head what we have to do, compared to how we feel, we don't need to. We don't need to be worried to take action. We can just take the action.
And that's where I think I feel slightly differently, because that part of the brain that is our survival system. It's the fight, flight, freeze response that we all have. It doesn't reason. It reacts. It's got no intelligence. So when that rabbit gets caught in the headlights, it hasn't said, I'm sitting on a piece of tarmac, and therefore me freezing will not make me camouflage, which is a reaction, not a thought. That rabbit will just, the tires will just go over it, because it doesn't reason, and that part of the brain doesn't reason. And the thing is, it goes into action quicker than the neocortex, which is a milli microsecond. I can't, have as more afterwards, with a neocortex then says, but Bunny, you're sitting on tarmac, for example. So the thing is, that's where those two voices come into it. That's why I'm saying, instead of just dismissing it or pushing it aside or pushing it down, befriend it. Right. So voice, you're telling me that this is, I've got something to worry about. You've got that in your head. I'm really worried about, like in this case, we're going to say going to school. Instead of saying, don't be so stupid, let's push it down, there's no reason. Ask yourself, what is it that you are worried about? What is the worry? Because you can then, once you've thought it through and say, well, actually, can I really prove that I've got something to worry about? You can then say, okay, then I can put that aside now, because I can do something about it. For example, if you feel more comfortable wearing a pair of gloves to school, I'm just going to use that as an example, and you think, well, is that reasonable or not? Well, actually, I feel more comfortable wearing a pair of gloves in school. Then that's fine, because you've worked out in your head that you can do something to help yourself. Does that make?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And as you say, we don't agree on everything, but that doesn't stop us respecting each other's opinion to play it a different way, because we're all thinking differently. And funny enough, I'm not advocating shutting things down. I'm not, and you can't, can you? I mean, once the cat's out of the bag, the cat's out of the bag.
Exactly.
because it's working, as you say, at a speed. I can't remember the speed you said, but it's working way too quickly for us to put the cat back in the bag. I'm just thinking, the one I heard was, does worrying help? Does
worrying itself doesn't.
No.
You're right. I agree with you. The worry, and I think that is the problem, that people worry, but they don't examine what they're worrying about. They're just worrying. And when you get to that point, then what happens is you're worrying and feeling stressed, and your survival system goes into overload. You just become stressed. You've got adrenaline, you've got cortisol, and all those hormones that actually are the stress hormones that we need to get us up and out and ready and going. But if they don't go back to their normal rest position after that sense of stress or that worry, that fright, if we're constantly, if it doesn't go back down again to its resting position, then we're on constant alert, and therefore our stress hormones are raised to too high a level, and then it will go from there up to there, which is completely out of control.
So I think the thing that popped into my head just then was, we've got these these built-in survival mechanisms. Now, the survival mechanisms, they're there for when we're actually facing the saber-toothed tiger. They're there for in that moment. Whereas I think what you're drawing is a distinction between when we're facing the danger and when we are worrying about the danger before we've faced it.
We can. It can be a danger or a perceived danger. So it can be. We might worry what might happen in the future, and I think really important, isn't it, that we don't try and fortune tell.
Yeah,
that is one of the things that people can do. They catastrophize, they fortune tell.
I'm very good at that. I'm very good at that.
Oh, we all do at one point or another, but it's at that point that it's really worth examining what we're doing, and that's when that voice comes in and says, oh, this is too scary. It is literally, well, what is it that's scary? What am I worrying about? If I'm worrying about next what's going to happen at Christmas, we don't know.
No.
We can't. So the point is, there is no point in worrying about it. That you have to think about it. Well, what can I do about it? Well, I can't do anything about it. I've got no control over what happens at Christmas right now. So those kinds of things aren't helpful. I would totally agree with you. They're just, it's a waste of our emotional energy. It's more about, I think it's more pertinent to think about what can we do? What's happening where we have got control over something. And then listening to that voice and saying, okay. And I thought, the one thing that I always tell my clients to do, and I do it myself as well, if your best friend told you this story, like, I'm really worried about what might happen at school, that we could all be sent home, or we could all be in quarantine 14 days, and I'm really worried about it, or I'm worried about my child in that situation. If you told your best friend that, what might your best friend say? What might you say to your best friend?
Yeah.
And then if you put it in that third person, and I often will say it back to my client, your friend has told you this, 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 and this. What would you tell your best friend? And the chances are, 99% of the time, they would say, well, I would tell them that actually there isn't anything to worry about because you can't do anything about it. Yeah. Now, the 1% of the time, that best friend might say, yeah, I think you've got a concern there. And how could what do you think we could do differently, or protect ourselves, or whatever else?
Yeah.
We can be our own best friend.
Yeah.
So when you've got your best friend sitting on your shoulder, asking you what you might be saying to you. You know what I'm saying? You can really have that. You can have that conversation with your best friend in your head.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard one a few months ago. If you're going to talk to yourself, you might as well be nice. I thought that's like, well, that's really weird for me because the negative voice in my head never says anything nice to me whatsoever, and sometimes it really gets me. But most of the time, I realise that it's a load of rubbish. But I'm not talking here about that kind of the health stuff. I just mean the other stuff, the worrying about worrying, things like that.
Being compassionate, I think. As far as our parents worrying, of course we're going to worry, there are concerns probably. I think some parents are going to go, yes, so, I've done my bit, I've done my 6 weeks and I've done time of having my children around. I want time for me. And I think that's very acceptable to feel that way. But our children, you don't have to say anything, they're going to pick up on it. We're giving out vibes constantly. You can pick up, if you can pick up on somebody's mood, you can, we all can, and children are very perceptive. I don't think there's any point in lying to a child. If a child says, I'm really worried about going to school, you just acknowledge it and say, yeah, I imagine you are. Because if you dismiss them, they feel they have been dismissed.
Yeah.
If you say, don't be so stupid, again, they're going to feel dismissed. And if you join in with them and say, yeah, of course, I'm really, really worried. It is a case of, what are you worried about? Be curious. I always say, be curious.
Yeah. The question.
Be curious. What is it that you're worried about? Let's talk about it.
So it's about, funny enough, one of the conversations this morning was about conversations and questions. So let's, and there's that, there's making, we can't make time, but spending time on that stuff, finding the time, snatching the moments, and using the time to have conversations and get under the bonnet, really, rather than dismissing it.
Yeah, and I think often with children, they can't even voice what it is, and they don't even need you to sit down with them. You could be depending on their age, you could be walking, you could be drawing with them, colouring in. They might say, I've got tummy ache, because they can't figure out, they could be holding their stress in their stomach.
Yeah.
That's not unusual. Or, I've got an upset tummy, or I feel sick. That they can be indications, because kids can't figure that out, that, they haven't developed enough to figure that one out and make the two go together.
Yeah. So if people want to check you out, Wendy, what's the best place that they should go?
WendyCapewell.co.uk, that's my website. But I'm on social media. If you type in Wendy Capewell, I think I should come up all over the place.
WendyCapewell.co.uk, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, .co.uk. So thank you. I'm just going to push that up. And it's not gone yet. So yeah, Wendy Capewell. I think not Wendy Copewell. Not Wendy Cope. That like I live at the Cope house. I live at the Coach house, but so Wendy, Wendy Capewell.
Exactly. No, I was
superhero in a cape. Wendy in a cape. Thank you very much for joining us, Wendy, and we'll see you all you viewers again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
All right, thanks, Simon.